Okay, you thought I brought a chair. This is, okay, I'm not actually going to sit. I'm going to just set that there for a moment. We're doing a series right now called On Point. As a church, we're called to have a purpose. We're called with a purpose and called to have a purpose. Now, we've said from the very start that we have a job here, and we try not to be shy about it. I have one goal for your life. If you come in this morning, I have an agenda. I hope you guys don't mind me telling you this. I have an agenda for you. I'm not trying to hide it. If you walk into this building, I am going to be pushing something for you. I'm not going to try to sell you a vacuum cleaner. That's not what I'm working on. But I do want you to walk out every Sunday you come in with just a little bit of a hope and a little bit of desire that maybe if you just get a little closer to Jesus Christ, that your life will be better. Now, I'm not saying your life is going to be better, going to be easier for following Jesus Christ. What I'm trying to tell you is that if you learn to follow Jesus Christ, your life will be better because it will make you better at doing life. I believe that Jesus, as our Creator, has given us the blueprint on how we can do life. And so we've started by saying we have a goal for your life, and that is that you become closer to Jesus. Last week we began to talk about, though, that as we give our lives to Jesus Christ, we have a purpose, and the purpose that he begins to give us is not how much more can we know, not how good of a fighter we can become, not how good of a debater we can become, but he begins to call us to live our lives out, that our lives become transformed or begins to look like him. Over and over and over again, he begins to call us to live our lives out. Our faith should cause us to live differently, to act differently, not because we are better than, but because God is doing something in our lives. I want to take it a step farther this morning. Little over a year ago, I began to realize that I needed a hobby in my life, and coffee wasn't going to totally do it because how much coffee can you drink? Well, you can drink a fair bit. The only problem is that once you drink too much, you begin to, because I can't sleep at night. I'm already slightly hyperactive. I'm already a little bit ADD, and a little bit too much caffeine seems to kind of just make that kind of go a little faster. My brain cannot, my wife is already struggling to keep up with my thought processes half the time. And she will constantly say, James, slow down. What do you mean? You didn't finish your sentence. What did you mean? Finish off what you were saying. What do you want to tell me? So I began to say, I got to do more than just drink coffee. And so I have grown up loving furniture, loving wood. And so I began to stop and say, well, I can work on furniture. I can go to thrift stores and I can find old furniture that needs work and I can work on it and we just have fun with it. And going through a store, I came across this chair. In fact, I still have it and I keep it at the moment. It's known as the Jens Rysum chair. Now, Jens Rysum was a designer who was a Danish-American designer. He was born in Denmark. He was one of the first Danish designers who brought Danish design to the United States. Now, this is a really interesting chair because this design, if you begin to go back in history, 1960s, began showing up all over the place. Presidential debates happened from this chair. There were several major bills that got passed with a president sitting in this, okay, not this exact chair, but this chair. It is an amazing piece of history, and it began to drive something in my brain for a love for mid-century Danish designed furniture. It's beautiful. It really is a pretty chair. If you guys get an opportunity, look at the slender legs, the way it's gorgeous. Walnut. Now, I tell you this not because I want you to go out and buy a Jens Rysum chair. I tell you this because the things that we become excited about, we do what? We begin to talk about. The things that we love, the things that we enjoy, we can't keep our mouths shut about them. We find ourselves getting online and we find ourselves searching and finding groups of people who think like us and act like us. And as someone who shows a little bit of interest in mid-century furniture, oh man, have I got some things to talk to you about. Here's the reality. I think this is cool. The story of this designed chair is so cool but it is not as cool and it is not as important as the story that you have. We all have a story. We all have a story that explains this morning why you're sitting in the chair you're sitting in. We all have a story that tells us where we got to where we're at, how did we get here, and where we're going. Some of our stories start off tough, hard, maybe even tragic. Some of our stories were great, of love, encouragement, of prodding and pushing. But whatever your story has, here's what I want you to understand. If you have made a choice to follow Jesus Christ, there is a part of your story, there is a moment that you made a decision that overshadowed or superseded or changed the way you see the world, you experience the world, you understand the world. Your faith, what you believe in, the person you put your faith and trust in, has done something for you that has done more than just given you a religious code to follow. Who you put your faith in changed the way you saw your past. Didn't change your past. It just put a different value on it. The person you put your faith and hope in changes the way you look around at each other. Your neighbors, your coworkers, your wife, your kids, your husband. The person you put your faith in changes how you view your future. Paul, I want to start this morning. Paul, a man who found himself criticizing, condemning, persecuting, even to a point of killing Christians or followers of Jesus Christ, found himself in a spot where he eventually gave his life to Jesus Christ. He could no longer change what he was trying to fight against. And Paul wrote this moment, and he wrote to the Corinthian church. And by the way, the Corinthian church was also struggling with this identity issue. That they were fighting amongst themselves. It was so bad that if we were to look at the Corinthian church today, we would stop and we would say about the Corinthian church, it cannot be a church. We would look at those people and we would say they cannot be Christian because of the way they are acting. And yet Paul looks at them and he deals with them as followers of Jesus Christ. And as he looks at them, he says, I want you to understand something. I want you to learn something that I have learned. And he tells the Corinthian church in 2 Corinthians 5:17, he writes them and he says this. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone. A new life has begun. Paul is reminding them that the moment you made a decision to follow Jesus Christ, it supersedes, it changes how you view everything else. Paul could not go back and he could not change his past. But the moment he made a choice to follow Jesus Christ, he saw it as something of Jesus doing something amazing in his life, that he took the past and he wiped it clean. Old has gone. A new life has begun. It changed the way he viewed his life. Now, let's put this into context. You know and I know we cannot change our past. You know and I know that we cannot control our future. We can make some wiser decisions and hopefully lead to a better choices being made. But we cannot control what is going to happen tomorrow. But what we do know is that when we took on his identity became my identity. It changed the way I responded or the way I should respond to my wife. It changes the way I should learn to respond to my children. It changes the way I respond to my coworkers, to my neighbors, to my enemies. None of you guys have any of those, so you don't have to worry about that. Just take that and cross that back out. This change of life that Christ came to do within us, we began to learn last week, he saved us so that we could become more like him. Okay, anyone want to talk about that? We'll get together and I'll discuss. I love the topic. But can I say this? When Christ came, he changed your life so that you could go to bed at night, put your head on your pillow, and have a clear conscience. Now, for many of us who have followed Jesus Christ, we're grateful for this moment. I'm thankful that God says that the moment I gave my life to him, he says, hey, for whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. It's a promise. As far as the east is from the west, so far he removes our transgressions or our wrongdoings against us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have. Aren't we grateful for that? The problem is that we become so grateful, and we're thankful. And we see God changing our lives, don't we? Most of us, and by the way, none of us are going to be perfect. Some of you guys are getting pretty close, but you're not there yet. None of us are perfect, but we know this, that the longer we choose to follow Jesus Christ, we see the change that he does within us. Things that didn't bother us before begin to bother us. Things that we didn't want to do before, all of a sudden we find ourselves, I kind of want to do that. I enjoy that. We begin to find ourselves biting our tongue maybe more than we used to. Having compassion for those that we would normally not have compassion on. Here's what I want to tell you. The problem is that we sometimes become so comfortable in what we're becoming, that's where we leave it. We forget that the things that we become excited about and the things that we love, we should learn to talk about, to pass that love on. I guarantee you, Rusty has no problem talking about Arkansas in a negative way. Alabama, here we come. We talk about, we love, we express the things that make a difference in our lives. For just a few moments, I want to remind us that if something has happened in your life, if something has changed your life, you need to pass it on. If you don't, it will die with you. When Jesus was here and he was getting ready to leave, crucifixion has happened, the resurrection has happened, and he's about to go back to heaven. He stops and he looks at his disciples and he gave them a command, which we are all very familiar with. In Mark chapter 16, verse 15, he looks at his disciples and he says to them, hey guys, go into all the world and preach the good news. Now, okay, we're going to stop. I just heard that word. Preach the good news to everyone. Pastor, I am not a preacher. I'm not going to start becoming a preacher. I do not like being a preacher. Okay, when we hear the word preach, you guys are kind of getting one thing in mind, and what is that? What do you do when you preach? You stand up on a little podium out front, give long, boring talks. That is not what Jesus was saying. Jesus was looking at us and he says, go into all the world and preach. This word preach means to proclaim or talk about. Go into all the world and talk about, tell others about the good news. When your team wins the Super Bowl on February the 9th, and by the way, I don't know what your team is, I don't know who's making it, but when your team does, I guarantee you, you will not have a problem talking about it on Monday morning to your neighbor. We are all excited to talk about the things that are good news. Jesus tells us if something good has happened in your life, if by following him he has changed your life, you should be able to talk about it. Preach it, brother. As Jesus left, his disciples went out and literally changed the world. They turned the world upside down. Within the disciples' lifetimes, they had almost touched all of what was the known empires of the time. And as Peter was growing older, he looks out and he reminds the followers of Jesus. Peter stops and he says, for all of you who we have impacted and we've told you about the one who came and died for you and forgave you and gives you hope of life, of a changed life where we are reconciled with God and we are reconciled with each other. Do something about it. Don't just live it. But he goes on and he says in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, he reminds those of us who are Jesus followers, he says this: if someone asks you about your hope as a believer, What does he tell us to do? Be ready to explain it. If someone stops and you say, hey, something has changed my life. I'm not who I used to be. I'm different. Then Peter says, if you have found hope and forgiveness and a new way to live life based upon following Jesus Christ, be ready to explain it. Paul. We know Paul's story, don't we? As Paul went around, Peter was very good at going to the Jewish parts. Paul ended up going to a whole bunch of places where nobody else really wanted to go to. And as he began to talk about God coming in the form of man and creating a moment, dying and coming back to life, where we could now be in reconciliation with God, people said, we want to do that. Because up until that time, what most people understood about God is that God or the gods were against them. They were fickle. They were cruel. They liked to play games on humans. And Paul came and said, God is not like that. This is a God who came for you, who loved you, and gave his life for you. And he wants to be in a relationship with you. And as he did, people came to say, we want to follow a God who would come for us. But Paul also reminds them in Colossians, he stops and he tells them this, the believers there, he says, let's just go on and read it. He says, live wisely among those who are not believers. And make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be gracious and attractive so that you will have the right response for everyone. Paul is reminding them that yes, the way we live is important. But it has got to go beyond the actions we live to the very words we use. People may be able to know you're excited when your team wins the Super Bowl. They may see you jumping up and down in your yard and smiling and laughing. And yet if they come to you and say, what are you so happy about? You go, It becomes of little value. If God changes our lives and we do not learn to put it into words to help others understand, it has little value. You ever tried sharing your faith with someone? You ever tried to talk to someone about what is going on in your life? You ever tried to talk to someone about, hey, I can't explain it, but something's gone on in my life, and all I want to do is say thank you to Jesus for it because it makes no sense. And yet, as someone is looking at you going, and you say, I can't say anything. I can't tell them. Have you ever asked yourself the reason why we struggle so much to talk to others about our faith? You might be this morning saying, Pastor, I would love to talk to someone about my faith, but I'm scared. I'm scared if I say anything that I may get it so confused that I'll just make them more lost. Isn't that what we all think? Okay, no, let's be honest. Most of us don't think that. Most of us go, I don't want to share my faith. I don't want to talk about my faith because I don't want others to think less of me. I don't want someone to think of me as trying to put myself as being better than. I don't want someone to look at me and think that I am trying to be judgmental. I don't want someone to look at me and tell me, hey, you're just trying to control my life. Here's the thing. All of us are happy to talk about the things that change our lives. And as much as that I believe that God can change your life, my goal is not to try to change your life. My goal is to introduce you to someone who can. I don't want to control your life. My goal and my desire, and I look, what we do as a church is to try to help you move closer in your relationship with Jesus Christ, not in making you to become more like pastor. Look, I hope and I desire that my life looks like Jesus Christ, but it is his life that we should be aiming for. My desire is that you find your relationship with God makes your life better. The closer you come to him, the better you become at doing life. How do we share? Look, it's easy to say, hey, we can all be put on a guilt trip for not sharing our faith. And that is not the point this morning. I do not want to stop and make any of us feel guilty for not talking about our faith. What I want to do is saying, hey, if you get the opportunity, how can you talk about your faith? I'm going to stop this morning, and we're going to deal with 4 things real quickly that will help you at any moment. If someone says, I don't get it, talk to me about your faith. Why are you a Jesus follower? Why do you call yourself a Christian? I don't know what to say. I want to give you 4 things real quick. Just take these, stick them in the back of your mind, file them for when you need them, because I believe that all of us, if you follow Jesus Christ, will have an opportunity to share your faith. So, number 1, when the opportunity comes, I want to focus on 4 things. First thing, what made you consider Jesus? The first part of sharing your faith is simply saying, hey, here's what was going on in my life when I stopped and considered Jesus Christ. Here's what my past looked like. Some of you gave your life to Jesus Christ when you were very young. What made you consider as an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 5-year-old? Every 5-year-old who chooses to follow Jesus Christ still has their story. What made them choose? Well, I had a Sunday school teacher who told me Jesus loves me. I believed it. Some of you guys have stories that says, you know what? I kind of grew up in church, but I went away from it for a long time. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go my own direction. What is in your story that caused you to consider Jesus Christ? Something caused you. Maybe it was a mom who was praying for you. Maybe it was an uncle who stopped and pushed. Maybe it was a neighbor who was inviting you to church. Maybe it was, and we could go through the list. There is something that pulls us to a point that causes us to consider our life back with Jesus Christ. You have a story. The great thing about it is that when you tell your story, you're not telling someone else about their past. I'm not here to condemn you. I'm simply telling you my story. This is what I did. You see, it's huge when we stop. You can't criticize someone for telling their story. If they ask what's going on and you say, well, here's what I did. This is me. It's hard to say, you liar, you did not. I'm just telling you, this is my story. Number 2, where do we go? Well, all of our stories leads us to one point. This is the Jesus at the Sunday school moment. Okay, if anyone ever went to Sunday school in the past, every question in Sunday school can always be answered with one answer. Jesus. What am I saying? The point of our story is that all of our stories lead to one point. It leads us to the cross. It leads us to the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's the whole point of our faith. There was a man by the name of Jesus Christ who came. He claimed to be of God. He was put to death on a cross, and 3 days later, he came back to life. He claimed that moment was our sacrifice, and if he comes back to life in 3 days, and there's enough evidence that says he did, I'm going to follow the guy who came back to life. The story of our faith is not a story of Cain and Abel. Who did Cain marry? Did he marry his sister? I don't know. I wasn't there. Probably. Don't know. But that's not my story. My story leads me to the cross and the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's easy to become sidetracked on so many other points. Hey, did they really, in the Old Testament, did they really allow parents to stone their kids? Yeah, it seems like it, but I don't know. That's not my story. My story is about a God who loved me so much, he gave his life for me. And in 3 days, he rose again, and I just choose to follow the guy who died and rose again. He claimed to be God, and if I would follow him, that he would do something different in my life. That's my story. So number one, what made you consider Jesus? Where were you at? Might be good. Might have been rough. Might have been prodded by your wife, your husband. I don't know. I don't know your story. What did Jesus do? All of our stories point to Jesus. Number three, what's changed in your life? I believe that if you choose to follow Jesus Christ, your life is better. To stop and say, my past has been forgiven. I'm not saying you're perfect. I'm saying God is doing stuff, and he's working in, and he's changing our lives. No matter how old we are, God is doing things in our life. What is he doing in your life? I've just found that I'm starting to find that he calls me to try to love other people, and I'm changing my attitudes towards, and I don't know. What's he doing? I'm still struggling with my anger, but I know, you know what I'm finding? That when I do, God is stopping, and I'm feeling this moment that I don't know. What is God doing in your life? Number one, what made you consider Jesus? Jesus as a center point, that's what I came to follow. What's he doing now? And one more thing. We're getting ready to close. What is their option? What is their choice? When we share our faith, none of us can ever make someone else follow Jesus Christ. Through my life, my greatest desire is that people will come to follow Jesus Christ because of my life. But I've also come to realize, no matter what I do or what I say, everyone has their own choice. It's not my job this morning to come down and grab your arm, bend it behind your back, and say, all right, now you better, or else. That's not my goal. That's not my job. My job is to simply remind you, hey, this is what Jesus has done for me, and if you allow him, he can do it for you if you let him. He just simply says all you have to do is call out to him and ask for forgiveness. Look, I love talking about coffee. I love talking about mid-century furniture. I can talk about a Jen's rice and chair all day. By the way, he only died in 2016. He was born in 1916. He lived to be 100 years old. I think that's fascinating. But what Jesus has done in your life is of so much more value than furniture, than coffee, than cool chairs. Jesus has changed your life. Your old life, the past, the things that you did against God, the things that you did against other humans. God says, I forgive. I'm going to take that past, maybe consequences you're going to have to live with for a while because of choices, but I'm going to forgive you. And I'm going to give you a new way to live, a new start, a new beginning. The old is gone. The new has come. If you do not learn to talk about it, it will die with you. What God has put into your life, the things that he's doing in your life, needs to be passed on. You may be the only person who is willing to talk about what God has done in their life. We all know people who are followers of Jesus Christ. Let's first live it out, and two, learn to talk about it.